Okay, so I had done a video previously that talked about painting details, baking, and painting texture maps, but I don't feel like I did the subject justice. So I'm redoing this with a little bit more information, some more work to show how brushes and how you can make custom brushes, save them, etc. So this is a model we worked on in a previous tutorial for making a character. And it's basically just a low poly mesh. I've gone and let me think, have I edited this? Yeah. So I've gone and made some adjustments to what I might have done in the previous video, where I've lowered the poly count in the fingers. So you can see these are all like hexagons in terms of 6 sides, because that's really all you need. And I've also lowered the edge loops in order to sort of save on topology. Could probably get rid of this loop too. And the reason that you might want to do that is you want to be able to raise the when you do a subdivision, or a if you go under add modifier, this multi-resolution tool, you want to be able to add enough subdivisions to get the poly count pretty high where you want to paint details. Otherwise you'll get some low detail kind of detail meshes and it won't work as well. So by lowering topology count in places like the body or wherever, and I've gone and I've kind of optimized this a little bit. I could go lower too, to be honest. But just in case I want to, add a t-shirt, and I think I do, but I think I can get rid of this because I don't really need detail right here. Which one of these do I want to get rid of? I want to keep it wide, so I'm just going to get rid of this one, this loop. Just select that and dissolve edges. And that doesn't seem like it does much, but by lowering, right now I'm at 1806 faces. When I'm working on my detail mesh, I'll be up around 4 million polygons. And to get the polygons where I want them, particularly in the face and perhaps in the arms, probably not so much anywhere else on the body because it can be relatively smooth except for like some cloth details. It'll allow me, by lowering these, the topology, or changing the number of edge loops in these spots, to basically get more topology in the face. So we could also think about maybe getting rid of this loop. And this takes a little practice. And the other thing is we can come back and add these later. This is really more about being able to sculpt in high poly detail, and this will be our low poly mesh. And if we say, well, there's not enough, if I take out these loops by dissolving the edges, and I say at the end there's not enough topology here for a game model, although there probably is, but if there isn't, I can always come back in and add some extra edge loops, and it won't really matter in the big scheme of things. So the other thing is this shoe. There may be some unneeded edge loops like here. Let's try taking that out just for optimization purposes, and we could slide edge loops to fix it later. Yeah, I'll take that one out too. And then this we can fix just by selecting these points and then merging at center. So it's still quads. It's looking pretty good. There's a lot of detail here. Just seeing what I can do. Let's try getting rid of this one. Sure, why not? Okay. I'm just going to leave the edges here because for the what I probably would want to do after I do this kind of thing is slide using the slide vertex. Just slide this to center things back up and space the polys out a little bit because you don't want to. Oops. You don't want to have like, really dense stripes of geometry, especially on something like a leg or an arm. And by using the slide edge tool, I can just redistribute the line along the topology that's already there. And I can do it with an edge loop too. So if I go here to edge slide or just select by edge, I can do that. So I might want to do that. I'm just doing every other one. It's a little bit quicker. And ends up doing the same thing. Okay. I think perhaps this one can go. And in this case, I won't move the sheet. Well, I could move this one and that one. Because I do want that in center line. And then vertex slide here. And this one, to be honest, we can just select and hit W and slide it forward since it's on the center axis. So anyway, that's something you'll want to do when you've got roughly the mesh that you want. What I want to do next is create this idea of like a t-shirt, perhaps a long sleeve t-shirt. I want to paint like a striped shirt on him. And the reason I want to add it in this low poly version is I want to create a seam like I've done with the shorts so that topologically you can actually see the shirt. If I could sculpt it in the high, what I'm trying to say is I could sculpt the edges of the shirt in the high res, but the problem is it wouldn't show up on the low res then. So what I can do is a couple of things. I could select by face and do this edge loop thing where I can just extrude a cuff here, and that's probably what I'm going to do. I could also just insert an edge loop like right here and do the exact same thing, just flare it out. So I can do that as well. That way I don't add an extra line here. So I can just take that, hit R, scale it up a little bit, do the same thing here to kind of create the notion of that sleeve, and then take this edge loop, and I'm just double clicking on the edge loops and then pull it back into the sleeve like that. Maybe go a little bit bigger. And then I can also right click and mark sharp. And I'll probably want to mark it as a seam too, since the t-shirt will be a different material or texture than the arm. So I'll mark seam, that way we can redo the UV maps. It's debatable. I could also mark a seam here and then just make this interior slightly different. That I'm going to leave it for now that way. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll insert an edge loop up here. Now the trick is my edge loops don't connect, so one of the things I can do to fix that is select by point And I don't need this vertical. Let's try going from here to here and just say connect vertex pairs. I'll fix the seam here in a sec. I just want to pull that down. I'm just trying to create an edge flow that'll go wrap around. And in order to fix that, then I can hide dissolve this and this. Let's go ahead and select these edges and mark seam. And it should almost go around then. Notice there's some weirdness here because of the way I've got an ingon there. Trying to figure out if I really need this. Dissolve. Now it's a quad. And then I need that across the shoulder. So what I can do is triangulate up to here. So let's just do this, connect. Yeah, you can't do a G repeat command on that, but you see how that fixes the shoulder edge there. Okay, so there's my edge loop going to the neck. I need, we can break this, or clear the, sorry, selected by point. I want to clear this seam and just set a seam for right there. Mark seam. All right. So now, in order to fix or set the t-shirt collar, we can insert. Notice that it wraps around now because of the way I fixed the edge loop here, and it was all quads. I can double click that, and I'm going to go ahead and just scale it, even though it's going to pull these points away from the center and cause a hole. But that's okay, I can fix that too. And then pull that down so we've got a collar. And then I can grab those points and just pull them back to center. Now, what I'm going to want to do is change this edge loop now and mark this as my seam, since it's the inner part of the t-shirt. So mark seam. I'll double click this. Oops. And clear that. Mark this little point. All right. So now our t-shirt works. You can see where I've fit a quad in here and added more topology for the head. We can pull the back of the shirt up like that. Same thing here. And also pull these points down into the shirt. I could add another edge loop in there, but I don't really need to for the topology in terms of how much is actually there. There's a little bit of a weirdness in the neck there. Okay. Go ahead and pull this down. In over. Yeah. And then these. So that they're more sunk into the t-shirt. That's good. There's one right there that's a little. There we go. All right. Now, for the most part, I've got what I want in terms of topology. Let me make sure, yeah. So there's the seam, t-shirt, the neck. Okay. And I could also, if I wanted to now, I could lose this seam so that the t-shirt, there's probably going to be a seam there for the t-shirt anyway. Okay, so let's call that done for the minimalization. I didn't mean to go into that much detail about it, but the point is, now if we select this, let's go ahead and save. And you can kind of see now I've got the detail I want to show, like a shirt edge for the low poly model. And now I can go in and add detail using the multi-res. Now the trick here is that multi-resolution wants to be the first modifier in the stack. So if I add it, it automatically pops to the top. It's just the nature of the way the code works for it. So what that means is I need to go ahead and I've got this mirror modifier on there so that I can just sculpt half and flip across the axis. I need to go ahead and apply that. You can't apply it in edit mode. Go back to object mode. I just applied it. And that means then I can also do my UV editing. So if I go to edit mode for the UVs, so I can select all of them, go into X-ray mode, select everything. Notice that because of the way the UVs and this modification that I've done, I already had the UVs mapped. We got a bunch of streaking points here that go across where I've gone and merged things. I needed to remap this thing anyway, so I've just selected all the UVs over here. And just for the body, and then go UV, unwrap, everything pops into place. Now, one of the things you may know, like this is the mouth and it's connected at the back. It may map better if I select these and then just mark seam for those. Where is it? There, mark seam for those two, which will be in the back of the mouth, the throat. And then if I go and project the whole thing again, UV, unwrap, it kind of optimizes a little bit. Let's go ahead and leave everything else alone and try to pack and let the rotation try to take care of getting it optimized. So if we go UV, pack islands, seems to do pretty good. Let's see if this rotates. It's kind of squarish. Yeah, it takes up. We'll leave that. And sometimes it can only do so much on the packing. Let me try that again, just to show the point. UV, pack islands. And you can, what you can do is you can see where there's ways to optimize this. I could pull like this, put it over here, and rotate it like that. there's ways to go. If you're, as a human, you can go and look at this thing and just see other ways to pack it. But it does a pretty good job, and I think I'm going to leave it like this just to move on with the video. So now we have our UVs, and let's go ahead and save. All right, we'll go back to modeling. Let's talk about how to go and paint details. First of all, now that we don't have any modifier on it, we can go selecting, go to object, select the object, the body, and add this multi-resolution modifier. Nothing happens at first because you have to click Subdivide in order to get things to show up or to get the detail. So I'm just going to show, I'm going to overlap just to show this. I'm going to do Subdivide. Notice that it's gone and created the subdivision. And I'll do it again. So I'm at 57,000 faces now. Subdivide again. 223,000. Subdivide again. 890,000. Maybe I want to do it one more time too, so that'll get me close to 4 million, 3 million something. Let's just look at it in shaded mode. But to show the point, I want to show you how we can add some detail now using the sculpt brushes. Excuse me. So I'll leave it at this for now. I'm going to turn off the nose and the eyes so we can see through. And we're going to try to add some skin tone to his face. What I want to show you is if you go to blendswap.com and do a search for brushes, or just do brush, you'll come up with some options, some brushes that basically have alpha channels, images that are black and white that allow you to sculpt with much more detail. And there's a nice set of brushes that allow you to sculpt skin. I think on the second page. Right here, the skin brushes. So if you sign up for this, you can download. And the way you import brushes into or anything, the way you get something from one file to another is you basically, when you download those skin brushes, you're downloading a blend file. So then you want to go and append this little paper clip here and find the brushes that you want to do. And in this case, I've gone and added the brushes to, let's go out one, go out another, to my Blender folder. And I've got this brushes skin blend. If you select that, leave the defaults set, and say append, then it comes in and now you're in the scene itself. And that means there's various things, textures, whatever in this. You want to click in the brushes and then you're going to see all of these brushes. Most of these are the default brushes that you already have in your sculpt tool. The ones you're interested in this case are this, not aptly named, but S11, S2 through 11. If you select those, let's make sure that's all of them, yep. Select those and just say append. Nothing appears to happen. When you go to sculpting, sculpting right now, you'll notice I got this selection. It's a mask, but where I've done the subdivision, it's split out the mask. All you have to do to fix that is just clear. In case you ever come in and you see something weird like this, you can just clear the mask. So with the brushes, now you have to figure out, because they kind of get embedded. Let me hide these. Got a lot of stuff showing up here. I'm just trying to clear it out so it's optimally visible. So now, if you click on a brush and you go over here under the tool and you hold down on that, you'll see how many options are there that are based on that brush. And this is how you go and you create new brushes. You can take a brush and create a new one by just taking one of the pre-existing brushes and making a duplicate and then modifying it to do whatever it is you want it to do. These skin brushes sit under this, I think, inflate. And to see them, you see now all of these brushes show up over here. They don't seem to have any icons, but you can see what they do just by selecting them and then painting across the surface of the object. So in this case, you see by doing that, it's and you can also look at the texture to see. So it's got this alpha channel kind of wrinkly texture that shows a bunch of wrinkles, and it kind of paints in blobs. I'm going to undo that. Seeing that, I can tell that I don't have enough detail in my 800,000 faces. So I'm going to go back to my multi-res modifier and do one more subdivide. This may slow things down a lot. We'll see. Now I'm at 3,500,000 polygon or faces and 7 million polygons. But when I paint, you can see I get a lot more detail in there. Okay, so these brushes, by default, depending on the size of your model, may or may not work. You have to kind of play around with them so you can increase the radius and take the strength down. And it may work a little bit better that way. So you start to see how it can work as a skin texture. You may want to turn on in the brush, either under the tool here. You may want to turn on symmetry, because the brushes won't automatically, depending on how they were saved, they may not come in with that. So you can do half the painting by turning on X symmetry. So let's look at options for brushes. Oops, I'm in the texture here. You can also see the other textures that got loaded in these brushes to get an idea about some of these skins. So let's look at 2. Let's see what happens there. So you can see the skin has got this kind of skin has different layers. It looks kind of like hand skin to me, or the top of the hand, but it's kind of wrinkly, and I want him to be an old man. So in this case, this brush, if you look at it, and the way brushes change is a lot of different things. You can look under the brush settings. One of the biggest ways to change the brush is under the stroke. If you look at stroke, it's airbrush. I've gone back to the other brush because I did an undo there. So if I select this 2, if you look at the stroke, it's anchored. And anchored basically just means when you click, it'll just draw out from center and you can make it as big as you want. You'll notice also there's a hard edge around this brush when I've applied it, and that's just in the fall off. So if I want to clean this up a little bit so I can work with it, go back to 2 because I clicked undo again. This is one of those, for some reason, sculpt strokes don't count as a full undoable event, so that when you do a sculpt stroke and you undo, it will show up. It'll actually undo the brush as well, the brush change, which is probably a bug in Blender. But for now, just realize that that's the case, and you're going to have to go back. If you make any changes to the brush, it'll do the same thing. So you basically want to kind of like, if you make a brush and change, sculpt out on nothing, just do a stroke, or make a dummy object to sculpt on, and then go and try sculpting on your object. And if you do an undo, you won't go back and undo all of the changes you made to the brush. Just for reference, just kind of got you to be aware of. So what I want to do is take this fall off, which right now you can see is like going pretty, and this means it's going to have, that's what causes that rough edge, and just make it a little bit softer so that when I scale, it's a little bit softer edge around the corner. The other thing, now I've gone and undone the whole brush. See, you can see it jump back here. Go to 2, change the fall off again. I didn't take my own advice. And One way we can do this is like we can basically take the strength down to 0 and just drag. Nothing happens. Now when I do an undo, I can't mess it up. So if I undo, my brush stays the same over here. So that's one way of working around that bug that will undo the brush changes. The other thing I want to do, I can hold down Control and make it go and basically subtract, which is really what this brush should be doing, because otherwise it makes these wrinkles going out and that looks more skin-like this way. And then I can go and sculpt the details. So and you just have to adjust radius and strength to change it. I think I want to do the fall off just a little bit more. Yeah, it's pretty soft that way. So you can see how these are kind of creating outward folds. And what I really want is, check my fall off, yeah. Hold down Control and do inward folds like that. And then once I get this set up, let's see, am I doing it across? Nope. There's two, you made us, let's undo. You may want to turn on symmetry. In this case, I'm going to. Normally, you may want to paint things like have different wrinkles across the face, but it's going to be twice as much work that way. So for the purpose of this video, just to move along, I'm turning on X symmetry so that when I sculpt here, it shows up on the opposite side over here. And it makes it just a little bit quicker to go and start. I'm just dragging out these lines and making kind of like a wrinkle skin, making them look old. Another thing you can to be aware of is, like, I've gone and painted wrinkles into the cap, and I could hold down Shift and smooth those out, but I may not want to. So what I can also do is, let me undo, go back to where I didn't have the cap painted, and I can go down here and paint using mask, and then just paint a mask that allows me to not affect into this the areas that I don't want to affect. Okay, so I'm gonna make a mask. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's paint this part. Okay. That's good enough. All right, so now we're free to paint without doing. So we want to go back to the inflate. There's our brush, and we can quickly, whoops, I forgot to hold down Control, lay out some wrinkles in the skin. Now you're going to want to use different angles and skin tones. I'm using the same one because I'm not being really very careful. This is actually a really good texture for the top of the eye, the eyelid itself. One of the things you can also do is you can change the strength, so you can go smaller and have more detail. And then the same thing here, the opposites. And this may be an example of where I might have needed a little more resolution around his eyelids, but I think it'll be fine for now. And then right here on the edges, we may want to go like really wrinkled, like big, like that. So it adds some eyeline blink wrinkles. I can shift these out. We'll use a different texture here. This will work well probably across the forehead. Could go bigger, like frown lines. Just say I'm not. Usually I might spend a little more time to try to get this better. There we go. I'm just trying to kind of burn through it to give you an idea of what's possible. These would probably make some that way it'll show up like a button. So we'll just leave that. All right. Anyway, let's go ahead and bake this. So to bake these, let's clear the mask. And we want to go ahead and save it. All right. So to bake a texture, especially a normal map, which is what we're going to bake so that we get this high-res detail baked to the lower res model, we want to go to shading. For the, and you can see here's our high-res, and this is our, with this selected, the material, this retopo matte, we'll go ahead and just use that. We'll add a texture, image texture, put it over here, make it new, call it normal map, and we want to make it pretty high res. Let's do 4096. Power of 2 is what you want, so it'd be like 1024, 2048, 4096. And we don't need an alpha map on a normal map. And we want generated type blank. And basically this will be 32-bit, is whether or not it's needs to be a non-8-bit image. A normal map is an 8-bit image. So 32-bit float would mean it's going to have, is for more like a displacement map. And we'll get into that in some other video, or you can look it up. So now we have our normal map set up over here, and we want to go to our render settings. And instead of Eevee, which is the default real-time renderer, we're going to go to cycles. We select this, and we want to pull our normal map up over in the render. Oops, I accidentally clicked on the wrong one. So it's just blank and black right now. So with cycles selected over in our render engine, leave it at device CPU. If you try to do this with the GPU compute, it won't work because baking only works for CPU right now. and you want to go down to bake, and then bake from multi-res. We can bake anything here. We can bake combined lighting, ambient occlusion, shadow maps, whatever, but in this case we're going to bake a normal map, so we need to click on this bake type normals. Notice you can do displacement. That's a different map, which will actually displace the geometry. So you can do a low res or a map that will take a low res model and make it look high res, and that doesn't normally work in a game engine. At least it's expensive. So anyway, we're going to do normals, and because we have, in order to do this, you have to have your UV map. We've already set that up in this tutorial, so we've got our UV map. Make sure this in the shader that your normal map texture is selected, and then once you've got all this set up, go ahead and hit bake, and you'll get this texture map over here. Zoom in on it, and it's slowly baking, but you can kind of see, hopefully you can see, it's going through and rendering as we go, but it's going and baking the wrinkle maps. You can see it at least most in the face over here. So that's our normal map. Once that's baked, excuse me, once that's baked, you want to go ahead and save it by clicking on the hamburger in this image tab. And you'll notice that the image has a little star next to it. And just click image and save as. And it's called normal map. We'll call this mouse guy normal map, and save it to whatever folder you want to put it in. And in this case, you want to make sure, do not save it as a JPEG. Save it as a PNG, RGB, and 8-bit. That way you don't get any compression. In fact, if you want to crank this compression down, PNG, the compression is lossless, so it won't really matter. But JPEG compression will cause artifacts that will make this normal map have issues. So we'll leave it PNG, RGB, 8-bit, no compression, save image. All right, once that's done, you can move this over here in the shader. I'm just going to show you how you apply it as a normal map. So we've got the image set up here. We need to add one more node. You can click add search, type in normal map. Click that, move it in between that and the output, select the color and put it in here, and then select the normal and take it into normal. Now, one of the things you have to do with a normal map and any texture map, notice that it's gone and applied it here now. One of the things you have to do is make sure that you set this color space to non-color for the normal map. The only map that needs to be color is the color map itself. And then now we have our normals baked. So if I go back to the modifier and turn off this multi-res, I don't want to delete it because I want to keep all that sculpted detail. If I delete it, I'll lose that. I just want to turn it off so that it doesn't show it anymore, but you can see that thanks to this normal map, I still have that bump that I went and baked, but I'm looking at the low-res model now. So just to prove the point, there's our low-res. I've turned off the viewport version of it. It'll render with this camera. If I render it, it'll render the high-res, but the shaded, but I'm looking at this low-res model and it still has all that baked detail. So that's what we wanted for the detail map. So that's how you basically sculpt detail maps that, or normal maps in this case, but there's other types of detail maps. But you're getting what it is you're sculpting detail on a high-res model and then baking the difference between the high-res and the low-res, and that's what creates this detail or this normal map. And then you apply that to the low-res version. You don't really need it on the high-res since it's already represented in actual geometry there. Okay. Okay, so for another type of map, we can go and paint the actual color map. So we can add a image texture here, make it new, call it mouse guy color. I'm going to leave it at 4096. I like to do them all fairly high. And I'm going to run that into the color map, or the base color here. And notice it turns the whole thing black now, because the image, when I generated it, it's just black. So now, if we want to paint that, all we have to do is go up under texture paint. Before we do that though, we may want to turn on our viewport version of the multi-res here, so that we can capture or brush across the details that we have. The normal map won't be affected. So we have our details showing up. In fact, you kind of see them duplicated on the object. All right, so if we go to texture paint, notice that we get a different view here. Right now, because it's a dark image, it's hard to tell what we're painting. What we can do is we can just paint bucket fill white, or white here, and everything will fill in for our UV map. Notice when I paint that, everything fills in, but it doesn't fill in the background gap or the spaces in between, which is, it's one thing, but like depending on if you scale this texture map down and you leave it at this setting without creating some padding on the image, you may end up seeing some like dark lines and stuff for the seams. But for now, we're just going to leave it at this, and I'll show you how to paint skin tone textures. So this is a trick that you can find tutorials about online. We're going to use one of the textures that was loaded for the skin as a way of painting kind of splotchy colors here. So if we wanted to paint this kind of flesh tone, you could just paint like skin and start brushing across the image like this. Okay. The problem is skin is not all one color, and this looks really fake up to a point. So it's actually better to understand the way skin on the face works. And one of the things that you can do to mimic skin on the face, notice that it's updating here too, is to realize that there's different thicknesses of skin, and the skin gets stretched across like bones and muscle and things like that, and also blood vessels. So where there's a lot of blood vessels, like around the eyes, they're going to tend to be cooler colors like blue. And where there is a lot of muscle or a lot of blood flow to like the lips and stuff, it's going to be red, and around the eyelids. And then where it's stretched across the face, it'll be a little bit more yellowish where fat and bone exist. So what we can do is we can paint in several different colors. So I'll just select red. I try to start with that first. And then using the brush, if you go up here under the draw brush, so it's draw, there are texture slots, and what we can do is we can choose a texture mask and pick one of these textures as a way of applying the color, but only in a certain so notice it's applying the red, but it's also applying black. And that's because there's this black background color that it's erasing to. But I think it's also gone and applied where the texture mask, I applied it to the texture instead of texture mask. I want that there. This is a bug. It automatically applies the texture, and it's applying this as an image. So I can erase that, keep the texture mask. And now when I apply, it's just laying these red lines in there on top. It's also sort of like, because this is such a tiled, it's applying it in an even tile. So what I want to do is set it to be either random, so that it just sort of like lays it down everywhere randomly as a tile, or set it to view plane, and then go to my brush. Sorry, let me scale this over. Brush and stroke, and it's set for space here. I can set it for airbrush, and it'll lay it out. In some cases it lays it out too thick, because I don't want it to be that thick. I want to change it to, and this is the way I like to do it. You can come up with something else, but I'll use that anchored, and then I can just lay these things down again as kind of an overlay in areas where I want these colors to be. So what I'll do is I'm gonna, let me turn on, oops. So notice it's not affecting across the axis, so I want to turn on my mirroring symmetry. So let's just go and start just thinking. So I'm going to save in case it's acting a little boggy. So save. So now I'm going to just drag. It's thinking about it. I may want to turn off because I don't need this to render high res. It still shows up, and it'll actually paint quicker. Whoops, I'm inverting. I'm doing the background color that way. So I want to just paint, you can see where the seams occur because of the lines here. So basically there'll be a lot of red in the nose. In fact, rather than painting the red first, let me paint the skin tone, or at least like a white. And we'll do the, instead of anchored, we'll do airbrush. So I'm going to paint the skin tone everywhere on the face, like a lighter skin tone. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just using it as a kind of background because I'm going to layer and layer and layer and layer a lot of different colors. And white is part of the mix. But the idea is that, and I could paint a mask again, but I don't want to take the time to do that. So what I want to do is just sort of like run this around the skin everywhere. I could also paint over here, and in some ways it may be easier. Yeah, my strength is set. I can make the radius bigger. So I'm just running this, and the reason I like to paint over here, especially for the face, is to kind of cover up these the black edges. And you can also see what the stroke's doing too. And because this is just the fill color, I don't really care that it's all facing the same direction. I could randomize that if I wanted to, but I am trying to get this to kind of like bleed a little bit lighter on the edge though. So this will be the basic tone. And I don't have to, if I don't want to use this brush, I could lose the alpha and just paint solid. But what I'm trying to show you is that the texture helps with the transparency, this alpha that we're trying to paint with. Makes a big deal in terms of the realism when you paint with it, so I'll show why in a sec. I'm just trying to fill all of this. Notice that the object shields itself when you're painting. So like you want to make sure you paint from all angles if you're painting on it itself. Okay. This is what I mean by layers on top of itself is. Okay, I'm just trying to get everything covered. I think it's good enough. All right, and then I'll come back with red. And instead of using the airbrush, I'll just draw it out. So let's do red. And change the stroke to anchored. And change the scale or radius. So notice that it's pretty bright and thick. I don't want it to be that thick, so I can change the strength to like 50. And it's a little more subtle, and it takes more, it kind of builds this way. In fact, it's building too quick. So let's go down to 25. There we go. So it takes a little, multiple strokes to get this delay. And what that ends up doing is creating a kind of transparent pattern that looks much more skin-like. These look like blood vessels, right? So, and right now it's like really rough, but by the time we end up adding all the blue and yellow and then come back over with a skin tone, it'll end up looking fairly realistic like skin. So, this is all I do is just like paint. And you may use different brushes, like you might have a pore texture here. Really, this first few passes don't have to be perfect or even close to perfect, because you're going to go back over them multiple times, come back with red, blue, yellow, and then some skin tone on top. So the lips are pretty thick and red. And you may even do multiple colors of red. So basically where there's thickness and fat, you kind of leave, don't paint the red there, because that'll end up being some yellow. Neck will have a lot of red and blue because of all the veins going through it. And the ears. Okay, so there's the red. I could do a lot more of this, and it takes a while to get it right, but trust me, it's worth it. And this is, you know, what I'm mimicking here is the exact same technique that Hollywood makeup artists or monster makers do with latex to create the color of skin tone and stuff like silicone or latex, and to try to make it look like realistic skin. So it's the same process. That's where the idea comes from. And it works. I mean, the reason for this transparency is because skin has many layers to it, and by building this transparency, it just makes the skin look a lot more realistic. And it has different colors too, so by doing this, it gives it a kind of more noisy, skinny tone as well. There'll be a lot of blood vessels right here. Notice I'm not being too careful because I can come back and paint over stuff. And I'm just going to go like light here. This also adds another layer of skin tone to it that'll look nice once the normal maps turns back on. Alright, so let's say that's done with the red, at least for now, so we can add some blue. And you want to go kind of a cool blue and just add it slowly and subtly in places where the skin is thinner, but there's still a lot of blood vessels. So like around the eyes, around the lips, or mouth in general. And the nose, just at the base, going into the nostril. May want to add it sort of around the cheeks and the jaw, near the ears, definitely around the neck. So you can start to see that this is starting to look like fat and blood vessels, kind of the interior part of the skin sort of overlapped. And sort of starting to look a little bit more like the human anatomy, like muscle, bone, tendon pictures you might see in a doctor's office. That's what the idea is to get that kind of an effect. Okay, so let's see, there'll be some here because of the blood vessels in the forehead going to the scalp and the hair. In fact, you can even draw blood vessels, like there are, using an alpha map, you could use, create some thicker, kind of more saturated veins and things. And I tend to do that, especially right here in the forehead. Right now I'm just going to try to create like a sunken, darkened eye, like a bruisey eye here. Alright, and then you'll want to go back in with some yellow, like a subtle kind of orangish yellow like that. And that'll be specifically in places where there's like lots of bone or sticking out, or the skin is stretched tight. There's going to be some fat, like the chin for sure, and the tip of the nose. And then once you're done adding that, this isn't going to be perfect, but that's looking okay. Do some here for the cartilage in the ear. Back of the head. And jaw. Try to catch up. Alright. So, here's what the map looks like. Here, you can kind of see, it looks sort of more like a cardiovascular map now with some fat applied. And then you just go back over with a skin tone. Whatever color you want to apply for the skin tone, maybe not that saturated. And just draw that over the top until it looks like skin. And you don't completely cover it up. You want to leave some of this blues and reds and stuff showing through. But that's what creates, let me the radius, let me take the strength up just a little bit. And we'll come back over the lips with some more red. after we get the skin figured out. It starts to get really subtle. You can't really see the changes easily because there's so much layering that it's hard to see, but you can see I'm sort of taking this blues and reds and it's starting to mix to make more of a skin tone with a slight blue hint. And the same with the yellows and the reds on the forehead. And then in the eyes. I'm just changing the directions of the strokes so that the kind of cross hatches across the model. So anyway, that's how at least I go about doing sort of realistic skin. Now, this doesn't look realistic yet. It's getting there. You can add some realism by going in and messing with the subsurface and using this as a subsurface color map. We'll get there. I'll do that probably in the next tutorial that I do. Finish this, I'll do it in 2 parts. I'll work on getting the skin map looking a little bit better, come back and talk about that, and then we'll talk about how to create some control maps for like subsurface coloring, lighting, and we'll get the texture map finished for this guy. So basically that's it for now. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, and when we come back I'll have this finished skin tone with the lip color and all of the stuff, and then we'll go into painting some additional maps for shininess and the roughness and the subsurface and